Hey everybody. In class lately we've been working a lot on adding and subtracting negative numbers, integers specifically. Today we're going to talk about how to add and subtract positive and negative decimals. So it's a lot of the same principles, but could be a little trickier. So let's see what that looks like. Let's start with this example. 2.1 plus negative 4.72. So remember last week when we were adding and subtracting negative numbers, our first step was to figure out the sign, decide if it's positive or negative. Now here I have a positive 2.1 and I have a negative 4.72. And I notice that my negative number has a larger absolute value than my positive number does. So when I put these two together, I'm going to have more negative than positive. So I know my answer is going to be negative. So let's write that down right here, just so we keep track. We know the answer is going to be negative. Now, because I have a positive and I'm adding a negative, I know there's going to be some cancellation here, right? If I was doing the counters, I know my positives are going to cancel out some of my negatives. So in order to find the answer to this addition problem, I'm actually going to need to subtract. I'm going to need to do 4.72 minus 2.1. And that's really the second step in this process. Once we've decided if the answer is going to be positive or negative, we need to add or subtract, depending on what the problem is asking us to do. Now, when we're adding and subtracting decimals, it's extremely important that we line up the decimals. So I'm even going to say that's my step 3. Line up decimals. Because that way each place value is adding with itself. We have the ones added together, the tenths added together, and the hundredths added together. And if I want to, just to make sure everything lines up, I can add a 0 here to make sure that we have all the place values filled out. So now I have 2 minus 0, that's 2. I have 7 minus 1, that's 6. And I have 4 minus 2, that's 2. And remember, I said my answer was going to be negative. So my answer is negative 2.62. Put a box around that so I can see that that is my correct answer. So that was really our fourth step, which was to actually compute the answer. All right, let's try another addition problem here. So here I have negative 62.175 plus negative 7.589. So here I have two negatives. I'm adding them together. There's no positives. There's going to be no cancellation. So I know my answer is negative. And because I see that there's no positive numbers here that I'm putting together, I know I can just take this absolute value, the absolute value of this negative number, and add it to the absolute value of this negative number to get my answer. Because I'm to have this many negatives, and I'm putting it together with this many negatives. Okay, so I'm doing my addition here, and I'm doing my third step, which is lining up the decimal and making sure all of my place values are lined up. So now I can do my addition. I have 14, carry the 1, that's 16. Carry the 1, that's 7. Put my decimal, that's 9, and that's 6. So my answer becomes 69.764. My answer is negative. So negative 69.764 is my final answer. Let's take a look at a subtraction problem. Here we have negative 8.952 minus negative 14.3. Remember, with subtraction problems, the first thing we want to do is change it to an addition problem. So we'll change this to negative 8.952, and we're going to add the opposite. So we'll add positive 14.3. And now we're going to follow the same steps we did before. Let's decide if it's positive or negative. I see I have a negative and a positive, but the absolute value of my positive is bigger than the absolute value of my negative. So I know I'm going to have some cancellation, but my answer will be a positive number. Now, because I'm going to have cancellation, right, these negatives are going to take away some of my positives, I'm going to have to do some subtraction here. So I'm going to set up 14.3. Make sure I line up my decimals, and I'm subtracting negative 8.952. And maybe to make this look prettier, I'll fill in these blank spaces with zeros. Now I want to do 0 minus 2, but I can't do that, so I have to borrow from this 0 here, but I don't have anything to borrow from that other 0, so I'm actually going to have to borrow from here, make that a 2. This 0 becomes a 10, and now I can borrow for this 0 by taking away from here, making that a 9, and this becomes a 10. So now I have 10 minus 2 is 8. I have 9 minus 5 is 4. I have 2 minus 9. I've got to borrow again. That's going to become 3. I have a 12 there. 12 minus 9 is 3. Here's my decimal. And I've got to borrow from this 1. I got 13 minus 8 is 5. A lot of borrowing in this problem. And I said my answer was going to be positive. So I'm going to leave this as positive 5.348. Final answer. All right, let's do one more example and then we'll call it a day. Here we have negative 4.27 minus 7.9. So once again, this is a subtraction problem, so I'm going to turn it into an addition problem because I think that'll help me wrap my mind around it a little bit better. So I have negative 4.27 and I'm adding negative 7.9. So I want to decide, is this going to be positive or negative? Now I have two negatives that I'm adding together. There aren't any positives here. Nothing's going to cancel out. My answer is going to be negative. And because I don't have any positives, what I'm really doing is I'm just taking all these negatives and I'm putting them together. So I'm really just adding the absolute values of these numbers together. 4.27, I got 4.27 negatives, and I'm adding 7.9 negatives, lining up my decimals. I'm going to fill in this empty space with a 0 here. And now I'm just going to add straight down. 7 plus 0 is 7, 2 plus 9 is 11, carry the 1. Make sure I put my decimal. I got 1 plus 4 is 5, plus 7 is 12. And make sure I double check my sign. I said my answer was going to be negative. I got 12.17 as my answer. Now, I know we were showing a lot of steps today, but if we take our time and we show our work, we're going to get these problems right. Okay? Have a good night. I'll see you guys tomorrow.